Hi, folks, and welcome to Rockin' Out with yours truly, J Rock. All right, so today we're going to talk about episode 5, my thoughts on it. I will pick one from each section and then go into the headliner, which was What Lies Underneath the Northern Seas, and break down my thoughts on it. The first one I want to talk about is on the cryptid segment, Cryptid Discoveries, where we spoke about La Bruja del Caño. I found it very interesting. The story, the settings, the dynamics fit in very well. I like that there's some polarization between the Native American lore and how the chief was killed in a war, and how that can be a portal for really strong energies, right? Typically, spirits in general are very much absorbers of energy. And when you have, whether negative or positive, if you have an abundant source, you can definitely take advantage of that if you're a spirit or a ghost. I also like the dynamics of the actual female. Most stories are creepy where they just ask for a ride, but apparently it seems that this one in particular wants to have a good time, wants to go out and do something like dancing, and you don't typically hear that in stories. They're usually very shallow, well-kept stories where the person is quiet, they sit in the back seat, and it ties in well with the story. A married couple, were going out on a date, and it resulted in an accident. I thought that was probably a good setup for a good ghost story, right? Because not all ghosts have to present themselves as evil entities. The result might be the same, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the story itself has to begin with this murky, dark catalyst, right? I like the fact that the lore is tied into the culture. It's no secret that Puerto Rico is enchanted and filled with mysticism and allure. It's very engaging culture where they live the music, they live the lifestyle of the tropics, and a good story for a good place. Very intriguing. I was very happy with it. And do I believe it? Well, I believe in ghosts. I believe in the paranormal. I believe that stories like this are valid. More often than not, every local legend or every area that you'll confront has some type of local lore with regards to a ghost. But this one is plausible. So what you don't know about Puerto Rico is that roads are very narrow, and these are two-way roads. Accidents are very common, and resulting in fatalities is even more common because people speed. And everybody knows that at nighttime, you don't stop at a red light. You keep going. And this is due to thieves and carjackings and things of that nature. So it is very plausible and very likely that an accident like that can happen. So you might want to draw attention to those kind of details when you tie it into a story like this. It makes perfect sense. So my thoughts, it's very believable. It's very real. I believe it. And by the way, I am Puerto Rican descendant, but I'm originally born and raised in New York. So I'm not biased. Some of these things I do challenge. In Frank's defense, I challenge the Chupacabra a lot because there's a lot of different prototypes of it. So very believable story, very intriguing story. I like the beauty, the allure that ties into that whole component of it being Puerto Rico. So to the next one, I want to talk about the Rack. And I thought that the alien in the In Search of Aliens segment, the Rack was a very intriguing species. Why? Because they have a lore attached to something we already know about for a culture that already exists, right? The Arab culture has a dark entity called the Jinn. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Jinn is like a demonic spiritual entity that kind of resembles a genie, right? There was a movie actually called The Wishmaster, right? The main character who played the Jinn, his name was Andrew Devolve, and basically these jinns grant you wishes, but they never turn out the way you want it. They always come out turning out really bad and not in your favor, right? I like the fact that they're responsible for that legend, for that lore, right? I like the fact that it's a species that couldn't thrive in its environment, but made an attempt to be in an environment which is extreme in nature. Very few people can tolerate desert-like temperatures, lack of water in those areas, and you really got to know how to survive, right, in those areas. And not only that, we already know that the Arabic countries are plagued with wars. So I found it very intriguing that they had some involvement with that specific culture and location, and how they created something out of it, which is resulted in the jinn. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the In Search of Aliens section. So now let's talk about the headliner, which is under the creepy stuff segment, and it's called, give me 1 second, What Lies Below the Waters of the North, right? So in episode 4, we segued into a discussion about Admiral Richard Byrd exploring the Antarctic, assuming that the world was flat, and he went beyond that. But then the question came up for me, well, we're always talking about the South. Let's talk about the North. And why the North? Well, it's simple. You know, if you lived in a flat world, then the North Pole would be the center of it all, right? But not only that, the only thing associated with the North Pole is somebody that we love and know, and we call him Santa Claus in our culture. In other cultures, he's referred to as Krampus, a very evil entity that, kidnaps and takes from people and can hurt people. So you have those two dynamics that tie into it. But then I said, okay, if you go on to the far reaches of the South, or what we call the perimeter of the flat Earth, and you go beyond that and you explore land, then the only thing you could find in the North must lie underneath, right? Water. It's surrounding all of the North, right? So then I started to do some research, and I found that the North ties into some of the stories and myths that were spoken about, including biblical references about the North being the original Garden of Eden, right? And then I ran into the video, and the video was pretty much showing you a vortex happening in the North Pole. And if you look clearly at the video, you can see a giant black rock, which is actually the tallest mountain in the world, according to the documentation in the video. And basically, this video is being recorded from satellite in 1987. And it was from a Russian satellite. I started thinking to myself, well, what do you find out there, right? There's so much in a body of water that hasn't been touched, hasn't been explored. You got to leave it to the imagination sometimes, right? But there's also rumors about creatures exposed to these magnetic waves, and the electromagnetic waves that come out of the aurora, and the energy that's there is heightened, so it can alter a species' behavior, its physical appearance, its capabilities, and that's been proven in science and other locations. Now, imagine that at a staggering degree, where what we typically call a whale is something much more. Perhaps, using my imagination, Lovecraftian in nature, right? I found it so intriguing. And then I realized that if that was once, according to biblical text, the Garden of Eden, then there was 4 rivers that split the Garden of Eden. And those 4 rivers, right, were protected by giant creatures. These were special entities, and each section of land that was part of the river was protected by a cherub or a type of angel, right? And in the center of the Garden of Eden, there was a mountain, and that mountain was a black giant rock. Ancient cartographers used to have these maps, and they would call it the Rupis Negra, right? The black rock. Now, it sounds kind of ironic when you think about it, because we have a company today that rules them all, and it's called BlackRock, right? So yeah, there was a lot of stuff going into it. I found it amazing, and what I found amazing is that even in the scriptures, there's these big creatures that protected that river, And people have tried to sail in the North Pole, and when they try to reach dead center mass of that location, they find 100-foot rogue waves and tons of different things that ironically can be explained, right? In short, episode 5 was very interesting. I feel that the Bruja del Caño is a real story. It's not just a lore or a myth, but it's a real thing. And I advise you not to go there in the middle of the night and give somebody a ride. As far as the rat goes in the alien segment, I found it to be very interesting to know that the species is tied to an evil entity that we know as the Jinn. And as far as the North Pole, I want to believe that all the fantastical stuff we talk about lies somewhere. So, yeah, I like it. And I think that there should be more discussions on it and more exploration. And let your mind venture off onto the deep ends and see what you can create. So this is J Rock signing off from episode 2 of Rocking Out with J Rock. Godspeed.